My name is Drew Waldron, and I am on with insider threat expert Shawnee Delaney. Shawnee, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, Shawnee, you have such an incredibly impressive career. You've worked with the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DHS. You've served 4 combat zone tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. With such a crazy career, how do you introduce yourself and your work to people who are learning about you for the first time?
That's a funny question. I spent years living, as they say, as the gray man, where people are not supposed to know who you are or what you do. You're supposed to blend in. Clearly, I have a little bit of trouble with that, depending on where I am. And it's very strange nowadays. For the past 6 years or so, I've been speaking and I'm on stage proudly standing up there telling people I used to be a spy. So yeah, I kind of just rip the Band-Aid off and tell people I used to be a spy.
That is such a cool way to do it. And I think people will immediately think of James Bond or Jason Bourne. And then they see you, Shawnee Delaney.
Yeah, I actually had a custom suit recently made, and the lining of it is the James Bond logo and icons.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Your work primarily deals with insider threats. You are an insider threat expert. For anyone who is unfamiliar, how would you define an insider threat?
Yeah, so insider threats are prevalent in every industry, in every organization. You have to look at it in 2 buckets, though. The first would be insider risk or human risk. And that is the risk that everyone listening has because they employ humans or they work with humans. Humans make mistakes. There's inherent risk in hiring humans. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they're taking a shortcut. Maybe they're going through personal issues, divorce, financial issues, rock bottom. That's all human risk. That's insider risk. We call that left of boom. So there are a lot of things that I help organizations do to mitigate that human risk so it doesn't turn into the boom, the insider threat. Now, insider threat falls in 3 categories. The biggest category is unintentional or negligent insider threat. That is people who accidentally click on a phishing link, or they print something out and they leave it in the seat back pocket in maybe an airplane. That's the vast majority of cases that you're going to see. The next category is compromised insiders. Those are people who basically fall for people who are trying to steal access to their credentials. It happens all the time. And then the next category is malicious. Now, there's a lot you can do and a lot that I like helping organizations learn about, but that malicious category, thankfully, is the smallest category. But in that category, that's where we get the fun stuff. We get fraud, sabotage, espionage, theft of intellectual property, workplace violence, all of those types of cases.
You call it fun stuff. It doesn't sound that fun, but it's fun to you, perhaps.
Yeah. Job security. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And you have worked with so many different companies, Fortune 500 companies, where you have created insider threat programs for them. Now, what do those programs look like?
Yeah, so these programs, it totally depends on the organizational culture, on a lot of different things of that organization. Everything that we do is bespoke, and that's because no 2 companies are the same at all. They can't be. And so where that program falls, how that program's structured, what is the scope of the program? For example, does it cover workplace violence? A lot of them don't. Does it only focus on theft of intellectual property? A lot of people start there. So there's a lot of different factors that you have to take into consideration. But yeah, we've worked with probably about, I think now we're at 130 or so of Fortune 500 companies that we've worked with. So not too bad.
Shawnee, you are constantly talking to these different Fortune 500 companies. Aside from creating the programs for them, what advice do you find yourself giving out the most these days?
I think, to put it in the smallest nutshell possible, it will happen to you. This is a problem where a lot of organizations hire individuals or they hire teams and they think, we do background checks and we trust our people, or we're a family and we have strong cyber defenses. And that's peachy. I'm really happy for you, but you need to think again. This is basically the cost of underestimating insider threat. The bigger your company gets, the more hands touch sensitive data. And that's a whole nother topic. A lot of people, even a lot of organizations, don't recognize the vast amounts of sensitive data that they have that people touch on an everyday basis. So you have to consider, it's not just employees. This is third-party vendors. This is contractors. This is business partners. This is supply chain. All of this touches insider threat. And when you think about some of those partnerships or people with access, third-party contractors, for example, overseas vendors, you've got internal staff who are very low paid. They don't have a sense of loyalty to you. They're typically overworked. They don't have any sort of investment in your company. Like, they don't get stock options and stuff. And a lot of recent cases, we've seen that bribery is cheaper than hacking. So insider threat programs are not a nice to have. This is really business survival. Do you know who has access to your crown jewels? Do you know what your crown jewels are? Do you monitor for behavioral anomalies, not just technical ones? A lot of people think of these technical tools as the be all end all, but it's human behavior. It is the skin behind the keyboard, both from the threat actor side and from the victim side. This is a human problem. And do you train your people on recruitment? How I used to recruit people and how they would be susceptible to it. Do you train them on elicitation techniques, especially people that go to conferences or travel a lot? I used to do that. That's how I got my sources. Do you have an insider threat playbook or a program that actually truly works and looks at the problem holistically? All of this that I'm talking about is called human risk management. And literally every single organization that employs humans needs to address this and lean into it.
I feel like we can't talk about scams and fraud in the current year without talking about AI development. It seems to go hand in hand. How has the development of AI technology over the last couple of years affected the work that you do?
It's definitely made things busier, but both good and bad. So while we look at AI threats like deepfakes and better phishing campaigns and voice cloning and things like that, you obviously have issues where deepfakes have become hyper realistic. They're faster to produce. They're easier to scale. These are tools that I wish when I was an active spy that I could have used. I would spend months creating targeting packages, for example. Like, Drew, if I was going to focus on you, I would put this package together on everything you like, on your family, on your friends, on your network, on your work, any disgruntlements. All of those things I would use to build this picture of you so that when I finally created a chance encounter, so that you and I could have a conversation, I would be prepared and we'd conveniently have a lot in common. Now using AI, threat actors are doing that. They're scraping social media. They're scraping publicly available information, not just on you, but on your whole network, your friends, your family, your kids, your parents, your neighbors, your coworkers. And they're putting things like this together in seconds. So I'm super, super jealous. I got to be honest. But when you have all of these tools, and a lot of them are free, and they can generate this convincing fake content in seconds or minutes, threat actors are using these technologies to impersonate executives or investment fraud, espionage related social engineering, etc. On the positive side, though, AI has just been absolutely incredible for helping to detect these things, because existing tools, they're not meant to detect this sort of technology. So when you have older tools like DLP or even some older UEBA or UBA technologies, they're not assessing and detecting these AI deepfakes and things like that. So you have tools now, kind of Minority Report, if you remember that movie with Tom Cruise, where they can actually detect someone's change in pattern of behavior over time just based on their communication, the words that they choose. And it'll flag things for security teams like someone's a flight risk, which, as we know, it's a big loss, right? Espionage risk, fraud risk, all of these different things. And it'll alert security teams before left of boom so that they can triage. It will notify people if they think maybe there's suicidal ideation or other things like that going on. So before bad things happen, security teams and HR teams can intervene early and prevent things like that. There's also, I've seen incredible AI tools that can detect not only if someone is lying, like almost like a polygraph exam through a camera, but they can actually detect deep fakes. So when companies are doing remote hiring, the big North Korean remote worker problem is just absolutely proliferating. And so it can actually detect if these are real people and just really help mitigate that human risk from the hiring angle. So these are tools that HR should be interested in, as well as security teams.
My gosh, all of that is equal parts fascinating and terrifying. I hope no one has a full profile on me. That's a lot to think about, even though they probably do.
I do, but that's okay, right?
Of course, yeah, no, yeah, you don't have any nefarious intentions. Shawnee, this has been such a great interview. I feel like we have time for one more question, and it's a big one that I'm very interested in. The work that you do in counterterrorism, espionage, cybersecurity, I would have to imagine that it is a ton of stress on you all hours of the day. Does the stress get to you? And if it does, how do you deal with it?
I've never really let the stress get to me. I think I feed off of it to come up with more creative ideas. I'm a very creative person. I'm a very curious person. I love helping people. That's why I do this for a living. And I mean, I used to save lives for a living. That was my mission. That's what I did. I know for a fact that I saved lives. So when I was conducting espionage, and that's a pretty incredible mission. When I left government service and I went into private sector before I started my own company, I felt this sense of loss. Like I was saving companies money, which is great for them, but where was my mission? And so when I started my company, I realized that my mission now is actually more important even than when I was conducting espionage, because I can not only help organizations and looking at it from the national security side, right? There are a lot of threat actors, nation states and organized criminal groups, et cetera, that are trying to steal intellectual property and trade secrets. But I can actually help individuals. I can help families. I can help protect kids from online gaming and AI deepfakes and things like that. And so I feel like my mission now is more impactful and I feel super fulfilled doing it. So I think the stress is probably a good thing for me.
Excellent. Very well said. That is going to conclude our conversation with Shawnee Delaney. Shawnee, thank you again for your time.
Of course. Thank you again for having me. It was fun.